It was the kind of winter that made you believe in fairy tales. The kind where snow fell in perfect crystalline flakes that caught the moonlight and transformed ordinary streets into something magical. That's how our small town of Pinecrest looked that December, nestled between mountains that seemed to cradle us against the harshest elements of winter. I remember standing at my kitchen window, watching as the snow accumulated inch by inch, transforming my yard into an untouched canvas of white. My name is Jamie, and at 38, I'd grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of my life. The morning coffee, the work-from-home routine as a graphic designer, and the evenings spent with a good book or sketching by the fireplace. I wasn't lonely, exactly, but there was a stillness to my days that sometimes felt a little too peaceful. The weatherman had warned about this storm for days, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer volume of snow that fell overnight. I woke up to find my entire driveway completely blocked by an enormous drift that had formed against my garage door, a wall of white at least 5 feet high. It wasn't just a dusting that I could shovel away. This was the kind of snow that required serious equipment to move. And of course, this had to happen on the day when my refrigerator was practically empty and the grocery delivery I'd scheduled was due to arrive. I stood there in my robe, clutching my coffee mug, feeling that familiar twist of anxiety in my stomach. You see, I'd always been the type to handle things on my own. Asking for help didn't come naturally to me, and the thought of reaching out to neighbors I barely knew made my palms sweat. But as I watched the delivery truck attempt to navigate our snow-covered street before giving up and leaving my groceries at the end of the block, I realized I might not have a choice. Let me explain why this situation was particularly challenging for me. Growing up in a household where independence was prized above all else, I'd internalized the belief that needing others was somehow a failure. My father's voice still echoed in my head. Figure it out yourself, Jamie. Don't burden others with your problems. So I'd spent decades solving my own dilemmas, creating a life that required minimal interaction and assistance. But sometimes life throws a snowdrift at you that's simply too big to tackle alone. I was still contemplating my options when I noticed movement next door. That's when I saw him, Alex, my neighbor who had moved in about 6 months ago. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence, casual waves as we collected our mail, but nothing substantial. He was younger than me, probably early 30s, with the kind of easy confidence and warm smile that made my heart do an unexpected little flip whenever our paths crossed. I'd noticed him, of course. It was hard not to with his dark curly hair and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. But I'd kept my admiration at a safe distance, convinced that someone like him, outgoing, charming, probably straight, wouldn't have any interest in getting to know someone like me. Our interactions had been limited to neighborly exchanges, borrowing a ladder once, a brief conversation about the unusual spring flowers I'd planted along our shared property line. He'd complimented my garden with genuine enthusiasm, and I'd stammered through a thank you, retreating quickly to the safety of my home. That's how it had been between us, pleasant but distant, like ships passing in the night. I'd often watch from my window as he hosted backyard gatherings, his laughter carrying across the yard, wishing I had even a fraction of his social ease. But today, something different happened. I watched as Alex, bundled in a bright blue winter coat, trudged through the snow toward the delivery truck. After a brief conversation with the driver, he began loading my grocery bags into his arms. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. He was bringing my groceries to me. Before I could process this development, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood Alex, his arms full of grocery bags, snow dusting his dark curls, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "Hey neighbor," he said with that easy smile that always made me feel slightly off balance. Saw the delivery guy struggling and thought I'd lend a hand. "Where would you like these?" I stood there for a moment, probably looking like a deer caught in headlights, before stepping aside to let him in. "The kitchen is fine," I managed, suddenly acutely aware that I was still in my flannel pajama pants and an old university sweatshirt, my hair uncombed. "Thank you, but you really didn't have to do this." "It's no problem at all," Alex replied, setting the bags on my kitchen counter. "Actually, there are more in my car." The driver was happy to hand them over once I explained you were snowed in. "I'll grab the rest." Before I could protest, he was gone, leaving me standing in my kitchen, heart pounding. I quickly ran a hand through my hair, wishing I'd at least brushed my teeth before answering the door. By the time he returned with more bags, I'd managed to splash some water on my face and change into jeans, though I kept the comfortable sweatshirt. I think that's everything, Alex said as he brought in the final load. You must be stocking up for the apocalypse, he added with a teasing grin, gesturing to the numerous bags now covering my counter. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I don't get out much, I admitted. So when I do shop, I tend to overdo it. What I didn't tell him was that grocery shopping was one of those social activities that sometimes overwhelmed me, so I preferred to do it in bulk to minimize the trips. Alex's expression was warm, without a hint of judgment. Smart strategy, especially with this weather. He moved toward the window, looking out at the still falling snow. They're saying this storm might last through tomorrow. Your driveway looks pretty bad with that drift. Do you have someone coming to plow it out? I shook my head. Not yet. I was just trying to figure that out when you arrived. Alex turned back to me, and something in his expression shifted, a determination I hadn't seen before. I've got a snowblower. Once the storm lets up a bit, I could help clear your driveway. The offer caught me off guard. Why would this man, who barely knew me, go out of his way to help? That's really kind, but I couldn't ask you to do that, I said, falling back on my habitual self-reliance. You didn't ask. I offered. Alex pointed out with a smile. That's what neighbors are for, right? As if to emphasize the seriousness of our situation, the wind outside howled louder, rattling the windows. We both turned to look outside, where the snow was now falling so heavily that it was difficult to see more than a few feet beyond the porch. Wow, it's really coming down now, Alex said, his voice quieter. I should probably. He gestured vaguely toward the door, but when he tried to look out the window again, the world outside had become a white blur. I felt a strange mix of panic and excitement. Maybe you should wait until it lets up a bit, I suggested, surprising myself with the invitation. It's not safe to be out in this. I could make some coffee or hot chocolate. The smile that spread across Alex's face made something warm unfurl in my chest. Hot chocolate sounds perfect, he said. If you're sure I'm not imposing? Not at all, I replied, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Consider it a thank you for rescuing my groceries. And that's how Alex ended up in my kitchen, sitting at my counter while I heated milk for hot chocolate. The awkwardness I'd expected to feel never materialized. Instead, there was an easy quality to our conversation that made me wonder why I'd been so nervous about interacting with him before. So, Jamie, Alex said as I handed him a mug topped with whipped cream, what do you do when you're not being rescued from snowstorms? I laughed softly. I'm a graphic designer. I work from home mostly, creating logos and websites for clients. I gestured toward my small home office visible through the doorway, where my drawing tablet and dual monitors were set up. It suits me. I've always been more comfortable expressing myself through art than words. Alex's eyes lit up. That's amazing. I've always envied creative people. The ability to make something from nothing seems like magic to me. What about you? I asked, genuinely curious about the man who had been my neighbor for months, but remained largely a mystery. I'm a high school science teacher, he said, and his whole face animated as he spoke. I teach physics and astronomy. Getting teenagers excited about the universe is my personal mission. The image of Alex in a classroom, enthusiastically explaining the cosmos to students, fit him perfectly. That explains all the late-night telescope sessions I've seen in your backyard, I said, then immediately worried I'd revealed too much about my occasional neighbor watching. But Alex just laughed. Caught me. Yes, I'm that nerdy teacher who hosts stargazing parties for my students and colleagues. You should join sometime. The view of the winter sky from our neighborhood is incredible. The casual invitation hung in the air between us, and I found myself nodding. I'd like that, I said softly, surprising myself again. As the storm intensified outside, it became clear that Alex wouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon. What had started as a simple delivery of groceries was turning into an unexpected day together. I should have been uncomfortable with this development. Having someone in my space for an extended period usually left me drained and anxious. But with Alex, it was different. His presence felt natural, as if he belonged in my kitchen, sitting at my counter with his hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. I hope I'm not keeping you from anything important, I said as we moved to the living room, where the fireplace provided both warmth and a cozy atmosphere. Alex shook his head. School's out for winter break, and I had zero plans today beyond grading some papers and maybe watching a movie. He settled onto my couch, looking completely at ease. This is actually much better company. I felt that now familiar warmth spread through my chest at his words. Well, I'm glad to provide entertainment in exchange for grocery delivery. I joked, trying to mask how pleased his comment made me feel. The hours passed with surprising speed as we talked about everything and nothing. Favorite books and movies, places we traveled, the small town we both now called home. I learned that Alex had moved to Pinecrest after a breakup, seeking a fresh start in a place where nature was just outside his door. He'd grown up in a big city and still marveled at the quiet and the stars visible at night. "What about you?" he asked. "Have you always lived here?" I shook my head. "I moved here about 5 years ago. I was looking for somewhere peaceful to focus on my work, somewhere I could." I hesitated, not sure how to explain without sounding pathetic. "Somewhere you could what?" Alex prompted gently. "Somewhere I could be comfortable being alone," I admitted. "I've never been great with people. Large groups overwhelm me, and even one-on-one interactions can be exhausting sometimes." "Not always," I added quickly, wanting him to know that his company wasn't a burden, but often enough that I build a life that accommodates that part of me. I expected to see pity in his eyes, but instead, there was understanding. "That makes sense," he said. "We all have different social batteries. Mine happens to be pretty robust, but I have friends who need lots of alone time to recharge. It's just how some people are wired." His acceptance of this fundamental aspect of my personality, one that previous partners and friends had tried to fix, felt like a gift. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to apologize for who I was. As afternoon turned to evening, we prepared dinner together using some of the groceries Alex had rescued. There was something intimate about cooking in my kitchen with him, our movements becoming synchronized as we worked side by side. When his hand accidentally brushed mine as we both reached for the salt, I felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static in the dry winter air. The storm outside showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had intensified, with wind howling around the eaves of the house and snow piling higher against the windows. After dinner, as we stood looking out at the blizzard conditions, it became obvious that Alex wouldn't be able to safely make it home tonight. "I can make up the guest room for you," I offered, trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness and excitement at the thought of him staying overnight. Alex turned from the window, his expression a mix of gratitude and something else I couldn't quite read. "If you're sure it's not too much trouble. I really don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," I assured him. "Actually, I'm glad you're here. I wouldn't want to think of you trying to get home in this weather." Later, as we sat by the fire with glasses of wine, the conversation turned deeper. Perhaps it was the combination of the storm outside, the warm glow of the fire, and the wine loosening our inhibitions, but I found myself sharing things I rarely discussed with anyone. "Can I ask you something personal?" Alex said, his voice soft in the firelit room. I nodded, though my heart rate picked up a bit. "You mentioned being comfortable alone, but do you ever get lonely?" The question struck at something fundamental, something I usually kept buried. "Yes," I admitted after a moment. "Not all the time, but there are moments when the quiet feels too quiet, you know? When I wish there was someone to share the small things with, a beautiful sunset, a good book, a funny thought." I took a sip of wine, gathering courage. "What about you? You seem to have friends, a social life. Do you get lonely too?" Alex's gaze dropped to his wine glass, and I saw vulnerability there for the first time. "All the time," he said quietly. "It's different when you're surrounded by people but don't feel truly seen. I have lots of acquaintances, colleagues I enjoy, students who inspire me. But coming home to an empty house, having no one who really knows me." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "That's its own kind of loneliness." Something shifted between us in that moment. A recognition, perhaps, that despite our different approaches to the world, we shared a common hunger for genuine connection. "Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone here?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, sensing the importance of what was coming. One of the reasons my last relationship ended was because I'm gay, and he couldn't handle being with someone who wasn't out to everyone in his life. Alex's eyes held mine, watchful for my reaction. I was out to friends and some family, but not at work. He thought I was ashamed, but it wasn't that. Teaching in public schools, it can be complicated. But he couldn't understand why I wouldn't just be completely open about who I am. The revelation sent a quiet thrill through me. not just because it meant Alex might possibly be interested in someone like me, but because he trusted me enough to share this part of himself. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly. "And for what it's worth, I think everyone gets to decide their own journey with that kind of thing. There's no single right way to be yourself." Alex's smile was grateful, relieved. "What about you?" he asked. "If you don't mind me asking." I took a deep breath. "I'm gay too," I said, the words feeling both terrifying and freeing. "I've been out since college, but moving to a small town, I've kept mostly to myself. Not hiding exactly, just not making it the first thing people know about me." "I understand that completely," Alex said, and the way he looked at me made me believe he truly did. The fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the room as we continued talking, sharing stories of past relationships, coming out experiences, and the challenges of finding connection in a world that sometimes felt designed for people unlike ourselves. With each revelation, each shared laugh or moment of understanding, I felt the walls I'd carefully constructed around my heart begin to weaken. As the night grew later, our conversation naturally slowed, replaced by comfortable silences and the occasional comment about the fire or the storm still raging outside. During one such silence, I noticed Alex looking at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm just thinking that getting snowed in with you might be the best thing that's happened to me in a long time," he said, his voice low and sincere. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Even though I'm not much of a conversationalist?" I asked, falling back on self-deprecation as a defense against the vulnerability of the moment. Alex shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "You sell yourself short, Jamie. You're thoughtful and insightful, and—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "And I've wanted to get to know you better since the day I moved in." The confession hung in the air between us, changing everything and nothing all at once. "You have?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "I have," he confirmed, setting his wine glass down and shifting slightly closer to me on the couch. "I used to look for excuses to be outside when I thought you might be in your garden. I even considered asking to borrow ridiculous things just to have a reason to knock on your door." A laugh escaped me, partly from surprise and partly from the absurdity of us both apparently dancing around each other for months. "Why didn't you?" Alex's expression grew more serious. "You always seemed so self-contained, like you had carefully constructed your life exactly how you wanted it, and I wasn't sure if there was room in it for someone else. Especially someone like me, who tends to take up space in people's lives." His honesty deserved my own. "I've noticed you since you moved in," I admitted, my voice steadier than I expected. "I thought you were beautiful and kind, but I convinced myself that someone like you wouldn't be interested in someone like me." "Someone like me?" Alex echoed, his eyebrows raised in question. "Someone vibrant and outgoing and full of life," I clarified. "I thought you'd find me boring or too quiet or too much of an introvert." Alex's hand found mine on the couch between us, his fingers warm as they intertwined with my own. "Jamie," he said softly, "have you considered that maybe your quietness is exactly what draws me to you? That watching you find joy in solitary things, your garden, your art, made me curious about the rich inner world you must have." No one had ever described my introversion as something attractive before. It had always been a trait to overcome, a flaw to work around. Hearing Alex frame it as something valuable, something intriguing, made me see myself through new eyes. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, looking down at our joined hands. "You don't have to say anything," Alex replied. "But if you wanted to, you could tell me if it would be okay for me to kiss you right now." My eyes flew up to meet his, finding them warm with affection and a question. Time seemed to suspend as I gathered my courage. "Yes," I whispered. "That would be more than okay." Alex leaned forward slowly, giving me time to change my mind, but I had never been more certain of anything. When his lips met mine, soft and questioning at first, then with growing confidence as I responded, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. His hand came up to cup my cheek, and I leaned into the touch, savoring the warmth and connection I'd denied myself for so long. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Alex rested his forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since you complimented my telescope setup last summer," he confessed with a small laugh. I've been wanting you to do that since you helped me carry that bookshelf in from my car when you first moved in, I countered, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The kiss changed things between us, but not in the awkward way I might have feared. Instead, it felt like a natural progression, a door opening to possibilities I'd convinced myself weren't available to someone like me. As the night deepened and the storm continued to howl outside, we talked and kissed and talked some more, learning the contours of each other's lives and hearts. When exhaustion finally caught up with us, I showed Alex to the guest room as promised. Though the goodbye at the door lingered, neither of us quite ready to end the magical bubble the storm had created around us. "Sweet dreams, Jamie," Alex said, pressing one last soft kiss to my lips before disappearing into the guest room. I fell asleep that night to the sound of the storm outside and the memory of Alex's kiss, a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the heating system and everything to do with the unexpected turn my life had taken in the span of a single snowy day. Morning arrived with a transformed world. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a landscape so brilliantly white it almost hurt to look at. Sunlight sparkled off the pristine snow, creating a million diamond points of light. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee in hand, taking in the beauty and thinking about the man still asleep in my guest room. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, and then Alex was there beside me, his hair rumpled from sleep, looking unfairly handsome in the morning light. "It's gorgeous," he said, nodding toward the winter wonderland outside. "It is," I agreed, though I was looking at him rather than the snow. He caught my gaze and smiled, reaching for my hand. "No regrets about last night?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "None," I assured him, squeezing his fingers. "You? Only that it took a blizzard to get me to finally make a move," he said with a laugh. After breakfast, true to his word, Alex helped me clear my driveway with his snowblower. I insisted on helping, and we worked side by side in the crisp winter air, occasionally throwing snowballs at each other like children. When we finished, red-cheeked and breathless, Alex pulled me into a kiss that warmed me from the inside out, not caring who might see us. "What happens now?" I asked as we stood in my driveway, the question encompassing so much more than just the immediate future. Alex's smile was both tender and mischievous. "Now, I think I take you on a proper date. Dinner, maybe? Tonight." "I'd like that," I said, returning his smile. "And after that," he continued, his expression growing more serious, "we figure it out day by day. No pressure, no rush. Just two people exploring what could be." It was exactly what I needed to hear, acknowledgement of what had started between us, but also respect for the pace at which I might need to move forward. As the days turned into weeks, and winter slowly gave way to spring, Alex and I continued to explore our connection. There were movie nights and stargazing sessions, quiet dinners at home, and occasional adventures in neighboring towns. I learned that being with the right person didn't drain my social battery the way I'd always experienced before. That with Alex, I could be fully myself, introverted tendencies and all, and still feel energized by his presence. And Alex, for his part, seemed to find in me a kind of grounding he'd been seeking. "You helped me slow down and notice things," he told me one evening as we sat on my porch, watching the sunset. "I've always been rushing from one thing to the next, but with you, I'm learning to appreciate the quiet moments." It wasn't always perfect. We had our misunderstandings and adjustments to make. Sometimes his extroverted nature still overwhelmed me, and sometimes my need for solitude left him feeling shut out. But we talked through these challenges with an honesty that felt revolutionary to me. One year after the snowstorm that brought us together, Alex and I stood in my driveway. Our driveway now, as he had moved in 6 months prior, watching another winter storm approach. His arm was around my waist, my head resting on his shoulder as the first flakes began to fall. "Remember last year?" he asked, nostalgia in his voice. How could I forget? It was the day my life changed, I replied, turning to face him. "Mine too," he said softly, brushing a snowflake from my cheek. Who would have thought that a snowdrift and some groceries would lead to this? As the snow fell around us, I reflected on the unexpected journey we'd taken together. I'd spent so many years convinced that my introversion, my need for space and quiet, made me unsuited for deep connection. I'd built a life designed for solitude, never imagining that the right person wouldn't try to change me, but would instead compliment who I already was. I love you, I said, the words flowing easily now after months of speaking them to each other. I love you too, Alex replied, his eyes crinkling with the smile I'd first admired from afar. Now let's go inside before we get buried in snow again. Hand in hand, we walked back to our home, leaving footprints in the fresh snow, 2 sets of tracks, side by side, heading in the same direction. And as the winter wind swirled around us, I felt nothing but warmth, grateful for the storm that had once seemed like an inconvenience, but had instead delivered the greatest gift of all, a love that made room for all of who I was, quiet nature and all. Total _char_count, 18,812.